What's going on, everybody? This is the blockchain backer bringing you the latest cryptocurrency news and analysis. Welcome to a new week. Today, we're going to be taking a look over here at the Bitcoin price chart, but I have some things I want to show you over here in the altcoin market that have me excited that's going on in cryptocurrency right now. Before we look at those things for the altcoins, we'll talk about Bitcoin real quick. The price of Bitcoin closed up here at about $43,000 yesterday. That closed out the week. The price has stayed pretty much flat all week after a big fall the prior week, and we're still starting this week off here in this same range. So Bitcoin's still just range bound. We can clearly see that right here when we look at the daily candles. The price has not had any type of big meaningful bounce come out of here just yet, but still holding that 39,558 price level down in here. And really, that's kind of been the theme of Bitcoin for the last couple of months. We've had a big move down sideways for several weeks, big move down sideways for several weeks, big move sideways for 1 week, big move sideways again for another week and a half. So that's really just been kind of what Bitcoin's been doing for the last 2 months. The big question on everybody's mind is, when is this thing going to reverse? Are we going to see something come out of here for a retracement, or is there moves down to the lower side? But in this video in particular, I'm going to start showing some of the optimistic things that I do see going on in the market. And a lot of those indicators are coming from the altcoin market. So again, my big general perspective of Bitcoin is waiting for a retracement to come into Bitcoin. Whether or not the retracement is going to start from right here and work its way back up, and we see some type of crazy alt season come in right in here, or if there's a lower move and then it comes back up into the retracement and the alt season begins right in here. It's all still the same general theme. Looking for a retracement to come in for Bitcoin, looking for the altcoin market to show its action during that time period. But to try to find where that bottom for Bitcoin could potentially come in, we've spent quite a bit of time looking over here at the altcoin market. And we've been looking at Wyckoff accumulation patterns happening over there on a lot of those altcoins. We've been studying the Cardano price chart because Cardano has a very clear and common crashing structure that's been happening in here. And we actually dove into this last week, and I wanted to follow up with what Cardano has actually done since then. So I'm going to play this for you really quick just to refresh you, or for anybody seeing this for the first time. But one that I've talked about frequently has been Cardano over here. So seeing that Cardano has bounced, and whether you own Cardano, whether you don't own Cardano, I do own some Cardano. But the point of this isn't to be like, hey, let's go buy Cardano and let's be euphoric about Cardano. It's merely that we followed this structure. So if you've been watching the channel at all, I talk about different wave structures and what I look for in crashing structures. And that, last week I was thinking to myself, hey, it's odd that Cardano hasn't still set this new low. We've seen it throughout the rest of the market, but we haven't seen it over here in Cardano. Then eventually it did show up. That's the thing that we're looking for. I've gone through this many times on 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, rolling back up to wave 4 within wave 5. Then it goes on and sets its new low. As we could see what happened here with Cardano, it was able to take out the low. It pulled back up, gave one final exhaustive push there, and then boom, now we're back up above here. So if you've never seen me talk about this before, you're kind of like, whatever, man. But I'm not going to dive super deep into it today. But in this structure, once something like this happens, that marks the bottom. Once the price has now pulled back up here, that does signify that that whole move is over. And this is typically how they play out. And I've spent this last week talking about that. Typically, we'll roll back up in here. There'll be this long retracement that will come in, and then the price will fire back up. But that moment right there would signify and mark the bottom in these specific types of corrective structures. And as we can see, that is exactly how Cardano has played out over the last several days since that video was done last Wednesday. So over the last 5 days now, the price of Cardano has gotten back up to that wave 6. So the structure has played out precisely as these structures frequently play out as. Now, when we were talking about this, we were saying, this is going to provide a good kind of like test case for a lot of people out there if they choose to use it as a test case for what's been happening over there on the Bitcoin price chart. That all year long that we've been talking about, that's what's been happening over here with Bitcoin, or at least that's what the appearance of the Bitcoin price chart looks like from the inverse perspective. When Bitcoin is flipped upside down, we can get kind of a different perspective, and we see that it's done the exact same thing. The May, June, and July pullback was right there to wave 4 within wave 5. And then we went on and set the new high, which was the expectation to get us through May, June, and July, that we would set some type of new high, but that would be the end of the Bitcoin bull run. But as we know, Bitcoin's price has stalled out, right? Take it off inverse and look at it from a standards perspective, right? And we can get it off log, on log, doesn't matter. But in the end, where we stopped, we've stopped right in here, right? Flip it back upside down, we see where that is at. But as we've shown in lots of examples, and as we've watched now play out with Cardano in real time, is it moves back up into this wave right in here, right? Before a longer retracement comes in, which is also how we saw the XRP price chart play out when we had that same structure. And then we roll all the way back up in here and then finally go into this super mega long retracement that takes, you back to the 618 or 702 Fibonacci retracement level in here. But that this thing takes a real long time to play out. But the mere act of getting back up in here is relatively quick. That is also what we saw happen with Bitcoin at the end of the capitulation phase back in 2018, the 5 waves down, rolling back up to wave 4, going on for the final excess. And then after final excess, the price of Bitcoin still pushes back up into this price level. Then what occurs? The big, long, super long retracement that comes in here. And that retracement ended up being about a 786 Fibonacci retracement back in here, but from a time perspective, very drawn out. So what does that tell you about the general theme of Cardano if that's what's playing out in here, right? It's that, all right, if it's following the structure, which it has been up until this point, the next thing that occurs is a longer retrace time period based on what we see happen in these structures frequently. I'm not a trade caller. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm not here to tell you when to buy, when to sell. I don't do trade calls, but I'll show you the data. I'll show you what has happened historically and try to apply things that have happened in the past to the present. We'll see if they play out or not, but I'm not here to give you a trade call. But if it continues, like we see these structures typically do, Cardano now goes into this kind of longer, grueling time period of a sideways retracement. Sideways downward, obviously. But what's the thing that we keep seeing in all of these things? Each time we look at this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 waves down for wave 5, roll back up to wave 4 within wave 5 for wave 6, and then boom, we go on and set the new low. When this pullback comes in, each one of these that we keep looking at, it keeps rolling back up into this area right in here, right? Each time. Does it on XRP, does it on Bitcoin. Here we are, we're doing it on Cardano. We watched it happen in live motion. That was one of the reasons I really wanted to follow this, because I've taken a lot of criticism for, not expecting Bitcoin to go to $100,000, and that I've been following very specific structures over the course of 2021. But so long as it's continuing to do it, I'm going to keep paying attention to it. And so if all of this keeps doing this over and over again, which we even see happening over here on the gold to silver ratio, that it still gets back up to that area right in here, well, then it still begs the question on whether or not Bitcoin's going to do it as well. If there's still this one last push for Bitcoin before it goes into this super long retracement time period in here. Because over and over again, that is what we keep seeing, like we just saw with Cardano, like we saw happen with XRP, like we saw happen with Bitcoin back in 2018, and like we're seeing over there on the gold to silver ratio, right back up. And since all of this talk is about Bitcoin on the inverse price chart, as we can see, as price moves up on the inverse price chart, we can look over here. As it moves up, the price is actually moving down. And then as it's moving down, the price is actually moving up. But in these general structures, this is what we typically see, which looks something like that when we put it back on standard scale and look at Bitcoin the way we're all used to looking at it. But why do we keep talking about all this stuff when it comes to the altcoin market, right? And it's simply because throughout history, the altcoin market and the altcoin season is dictated by whatever Bitcoin is doing. So long as Bitcoin isn't giving a clear, concise direction just yet, the altcoin market still has to wait on Bitcoin. So I'll show you the things that I see happening with Bitcoin to get the clear signal for the altcoin market to take off in similar situations that we've seen happen before. So if the top of the Bitcoin bull run is in, as I suspect it is, throughout history, we've seen that as Bitcoin goes into that retracement, that's the most optimistic time for an alt season to potentially happen. So that's where my thought process is right now. Now, why do we spend so much time looking at this? And it's because the underlying question that is always asked a million bajillion times is when moon. And I will tell you this, that nobody knows when moon. And it doesn't matter how many times I'll say it on here that you can't predict time, the question still gets asked every single day. And the wording on it is different every time, right? People will write out full long paragraphs that what you really recognize that the whole paragraph actually was 2 simple words, and that those words were when moon. And your guess is as good as mine. Your guess is as good as the best technical analyst in the entire world out there, whoever that may be, the answer of when is a non-answerable question. But we can look for the things that can tell us that price levels have reached the when phase. And right now, we're at an area of interest, which is what I've talked about in previous videos. It's what we talked about over here on Twitter. And it's the exact same distance that we've seen happen in A-legs for Bitcoin corrections previously. 39,558 is precisely to what was going on in here. This is our run up that happened in February, March, April, May, big fall, big rise up, November and December, boom, big fall. This level right in here from what we saw happen back in 2017 for Bitcoin is precisely the location of where we're at right now with Bitcoin, the 39,558. So if that level holds, hey, we've got something to reference back to say, hey, this has happened similarly before. If it doesn't, and if it starts heading lower for Bitcoin to those lower 30,000s, then we say, hey, we're still just following exactly what we've always followed for the last several years. And that the next big phase to look forward to for Bitcoin is some big retracement coming out of here. Like I just showed there on Cardano, this is what we would be looking forward to as we've even seen on Bitcoin here before. But then begs the question, which one's better, right? So, first of all, for me, like I always say, I believe that Bitcoin's in a bear market. I've already exited my Bitcoin that I plan on selling at these price levels. The remaining 35% of the Bitcoin that I own is a long-term hold, right? I'll ride it down to $2,000, doesn't matter. It's just locked away. It's something that I have a time preference on of like 10 years. It doesn't matter to me. I took care of what I needed to with Bitcoin during this bull run. Bitcoin goes higher, then hey, I've got other levels that I'll let go of that Bitcoin at, but otherwise I'm not worried about it. So the actual price action of what occurs with Bitcoin is not really of concern to me because I'm not taking any actions on Bitcoin during any type of retracement that's going to be happening here for Bitcoin. But you have two different things that are happening right in here, right? One, either the price level of Bitcoin is going to hold where it's at, that 39,558, that's the bottom. We go into a retracement, then boom, a whole year of just whatever's going to happen, slowly grinding down, going into a C leg that's eventually going to capitulate probably a year or so from now to the lows below what happened back in May, like we saw in here, right? Kind of just a quicker kind of retrace and then a long, grueling time period going off into a capitulation taken at that level, or something more in the cards that looks like this. And, everybody can kind of ask, you can kind of weigh out the pros and the cons of either one. At least that's the way I work, right? Because I don't have a huge interest in actual Bitcoin itself, but my interest is more focused on the altcoin market. If Bitcoin holds where it's currently at right now and starts bouncing, well then, hey, that's great. Let's see what happens with the altcoin market. That means the time is here. The time is now. Let's rock and roll. But what that also means is that there's probably not a lot of time left remaining, that things have to happen really quickly over there in the altcoin market before Bitcoin can get itself back into a retracement, get up in here, and the whole altcoin market's got to really go on and do its thing relatively quickly. So the benefits of that, right? Hey, there's not really any more downside left, it doesn't appear. It's going to happen really quick. Everybody's when moon question can get answered quickly, but it doesn't buy very much time for things to kind of really turn themselves around. And as we know, a lot of these altcoins are pretty low. They have a lot of work they've got to do in a very short amount of time. But if that doesn't happen, right? If it doesn't hold here and it follows what we've seen happen before and it goes down, what does that show you on all those structures is that every time this plays out, it's a long retracement that comes in here, and that buys a ton of time for those altcoins to go on a bigger run. If the retracement can look more so along like this, and here, let me flip all this upside down, and I'm going to take everything off this screen that you could see, but see how much longer that retracement is that comes in here from the inverse perspective here. Or looking at Bitcoin over here, right? Longer time period. Invert that scale so you can see it a little bit better. Look how long that is for that retracement that comes in there, just like that. That buys a whole lot more time after pulling back down into these lows for a retracement rally and for an alt season to show up like we saw happen back in 2017 and 2018. And for each of those things that we show with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it's that retracement that is long and grueling. But if the prices hold from where they're currently at, the example that we have to lean back on in here is what happened back in here, in which things were not that slow. They were relatively quick. And a lot would have to happen in the altcoin market in a very short amount of time if it were to repeat something like that. It would have, maybe a couple of months to be able to do it. Whereas in something like this, with a longer, grueling, retracement that comes in here, ton of time is bought. I mean, just if you just use ratios in there and compare that to the amount of time it took for everything to come down, I mean, what is that? How long does that make an altcoin run rally. I mean, if you had something like that, maybe a year, I don't know. I mean, then all the wind mooners are going to say, I have to wait a year. No, no, no. It just means if it started at the bottom, it could last a whole year. But again, this is all predicting time. But what we see happening over and over again, I keep using that over and over again, is that we see the price pull back up into this area over here, and then long retracement shows up. So you could see that like that because I've drawn that over there on the current Bitcoin price chart several times, and it's been kind of hard to imagine what that could actually look like in there. And you could see that's how it can look. So when I show you that on Bitcoin, you kind of get a better idea of what I'm talking about from a bigger perspective with this long, grueling retracement that could come in. But again, to each their own, right? Pick your poison. Which one do you want to happen? And I don't have the answer, right? This is all a guessing game based on things that have happened in the past. I think if we did something like that, the short term pain would pretty much stink. Morale is already at the lows. People are already beaten up. You give one more flush down there in Bitcoin, geez, you can. I've been here long enough to know exactly what it's going to be like out there on Twitter, what it's going to be like on comments, what it's just the general sentiment of the entire market will be at that point if something like that happens. So that's not that great. Then, if it takes a long time to retrace, what does that mean during the retracement is that not a lot of people will have faith in the retracement. And that's typically what you do have when you finally are going into a reversal, is that most people won't believe it's actually happening, is that we're still just doing the same thing over and over again. It's still just going to keep going lower. And once sentiment is beaten down enough. So that's typically the type of conditions that we do have for reversals coming in, is once most people don't believe it's going to reverse this time. But then by the time it gets back to the retracement levels, all the optimistic will return and all those same people will buy back in, only to, So that scenario, not fun in the short term to medium term time frame, but I keep showing you these structures, and that frequently is what occurs. Otherwise, hey, we can hold from where we're at right now. Let's get going. Send the altcoin market on its way at this exact moment. And so I'm probably not going to touch too much on these topics right here throughout the rest of the week. I think we've kind of gone through it all right in here. I've shown it all to you. Your guess is as good as mine on which one it's going to do. Is it going to hold and perform something like this? Or is it going to follow the crashing structure and do the things that we typically see these things do? And that's why we followed Cardano, and we talked about it before it started playing itself out to show you what eventually happens. And as you can see in this example for Cardano, just within the last few days, it did play out in that manner. And that's the manner of if Bitcoin goes down to like $30,000. So we followed the structure. We said this move down in here would indicate that the bottom would be in, and that the next phase that's typical in these corrections is a move right back up there to wave 6. That's what's happened with Cardano. Will that happen with Bitcoin, which would be like a $30,000 Bitcoin? And that range could be anywhere 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, who knows? Or does it hold? So a head scratcher for Bitcoin, but those are the things I'm looking at. I think if Bitcoin holds from where we're at right now, well, then the whole market's got to get moving pretty darn quick. If Bitcoin does perform something like this, then it sets itself up for that longer retracement, that longer time period for the altcoin market to have a bigger run. And we know that the retracement back in 2017, 2018 was for the altcoin market to go on its big run. So the vast majority of the altcoin move happened in this time period, and the top of the altcoin market came in right in here when Bitcoin got back to the 702 Fibonacci retracement. So it's all just a waiting game at this point for Bitcoin to begin that moment. But one of the main reasons that we've been following Cardano was to prove the point of what we've been looking at over there on the inverse price chart of Bitcoin, and that these structures indicate that the bottom would be in, right? So we watched it happen here. We said, hey, look, it's missing that final flush. It gets the final flush, one push, one excessive push, boom, the bottom was in. Once it crossed back above wave 5, right, and it got back up in here, that indicated that the bottom was in, and that in these typical structures, this is where it heads to. It heads right back up into these price levels right in here. So it's another check mark on the structure of Bitcoin currently to indicate that the top of Bitcoin is already in, that the bull run for Bitcoin is over. Still shows that there's a retracement that happens in there. Retracements typically happen. A typical retracement for Bitcoin's back up there into the mid 50,000s, but it's another check mark on that structure saying, yep, that typically marks the end. But for anybody who has been a student of the market for a long enough time and was here in 2017 and 2018 to know, it was into Bitcoin's retracement after the top did come in. That's when the real fireworks went off in the altcoin market. Hey, it creates a ton of excitement and buzz for the altcoin market that there could be this big fireworks display, this big show happen. And that's a thing that I'm really optimistic for and I'm really excited about. And I even posted that over here on Twitter yesterday on a Sunday. I've been looking at charts all afternoon. I'm absurdly bullish on the altcoin market and borderline FOMO. I very rarely spend much time looking at the altcoin versus Bitcoin pairing. So, if you don't know, you can trade a lot of cryptocurrencies versus Bitcoin rather than versus US dollars or whatever currency you trade it against. But one of the top trading pairs for the altcoin market is versus Bitcoin. So rather than measuring an altcoin in its USD value, it gets measured in its Satoshi value or its Bitcoin value. And for me personally, I don't really get very much signal when it comes to looking at these altcoin versus Bitcoin price charts. And I recognize that there really wasn't a ton of signal in there dating back to 2017. And the concept in 2017 was always, trade the altcoins versus Bitcoin because in the end, you just need to be accumulating more Bitcoin. So if you're going to play in the altcoin market, make sure it's to accumulate more Bitcoin. So only pay attention to the altcoin versus Bitcoin price charts to indicate if it's stronger than Bitcoin. So that way you're at least earning Bitcoin. But when you go into a bear market, none of that really matters anymore. If Bitcoin's going to be losing, 85% of its value like it typically does during bear markets, what's more important, playing against US dollar values or playing against Bitcoin? So it becomes this big trickery on, when is the appropriate time to be doing that, and is there really any signal in there? And what we see is if we look at altcoins like Stellar Lumens over here, and we, measure it in Bitcoin Satoshi values, we can see that from a Bitcoin perspective, Stellar Lumens is at its 2017 lows. In 2016 as well. You can see the Satoshi value is the same as it was over here in February of 2016. But what we'll notice as we go through a couple of these charts is this happens all the time, where it just goes down into this grueling period and then this big breakout that eventually comes. Whether it's Stellar Lumens, whether it's XRP, Litecoin, or Ethereum even getting all the way down in here to its 2017 lows. And if we scoot this just over here just a little bit like this, right, this is what it looked like not too long ago. Pretty gloom and doom. Till eventually it started going on a little bit of a run, which, if you don't know, was even the case for Cardano in here, pulling all the way back down to the 2017 lows, gloom and doom, long time period just grinding down in here before finally turning on its way up. But a lot of these coins have yet to do it. They're sitting here, like Litecoin, right on its actual 2017 low, right down in here. And, pessimism for the altcoin market's at its absolute worst. And the thing that we're noticing over here in the altcoin market for a lot of the altcoins, the vast majority of them, is that there's yet to have been a big pop, a big reclaim for them versus Bitcoin. Whether it's some type of retracement that comes in here or whether it's some type of big breakout that we can see even on Litecoin in here, you're usually going to get at least a 50% retracement, right? Almost to the 618. Where do you get right here on this one? You get back to a 702 retracement. Even in here, where do you get back to? You get back to a 618 retracement. But even if we just go from right in here, there you go, 786. And then what about this fall right in here? Right in here, there's been literally no retracement, right? So there's been no big move back up, but we see it right down here at its 2017 lows. Same goes for XRP, right? We see big explosions that happen here in XRP throughout the history of time, but we're in one of these grinding periods where it's just like, man, it has been like this for a long time period in here and gotten back to its 2017 lows without a big breakout just yet. So what happens in these long time periods like this? Well, psychology gets beaten down for sure. This time is different. It's never going to happen, right? But I started talking about this by having this chart right here with Verge, right? And many of you may have never heard of Verge. I'm not endorsing Verge or saying you should go out and buy it. But it had a very interesting structure that was really clean to me back in 2017 before its price chart versus Bitcoin ended up exploding. And for those who have been with this channel for a long time, we talk about you go into your parabolic rise, you have your crash, you have your 702 retracement, reaccumulation, and then you go off into your explosion. And typically that retracement is going to get you somewhere between a 618, 702, or 786 Fibonacci retracement level, pulls back in, and then ends up going. That is what we had happen to Bitcoin back in 2018, 19, and 20. We had a big rise up, you had a parabolic rise with a crash, a retrace, a reaccumulation, and then off to extensions. And that was very similar to what we saw happen for Verge back in 2017 over the course of 7 months, and it had a really clean structure in here before Verge eventually exploded out of here, which was occurring right back in here in 2017, right? You had your big parabolic rise, your crash, retrace back to 702, then reaccumulation, and then an explosion, and not just an explosion, a massive explosion. But the question arises, was there any type of signal that came in here? And if we actually look at this for a minute, you can actually see how unbelievably similar it was to what Bitcoin did do in 2017 or 2018, 19, and 20 for its bear market. Is that what did Bitcoin do, right? Bitcoin had its big run up to $20,000, had its big 70% loss, and then it sat here and hovered. And then it just stood here on $6,000 before eventually capitulating from $6,000 down to $3. And then what did it do? Stayed down in here and eventually popped, right? That's the same thing, right? The big run up, big crash, hovered in here sideways, and then boom, capitulated, and then had its pop back to retracement levels and back into reaccumulation, just like we see over here with Verge. Same thing, the big crash, and then hovering, then finally capitulates, and then goes into retrace and reaccumulation. But the big question is, like we talked about, is there really any signal that can be coming out of here in this? Can we make any sense out of what's going on with these altcoin versus Bitcoin price charts right now to indicate or excite me to say, hey, I've been looking at charts all afternoon. I'm absurdly bullish on the altcoin market and borderline FOMO. And well, the reality is we have at least Verge to be able to look back on because it has a very common structure and a normal accumulation structure of what happens before an explosion happens, as we've seen happen with Bitcoin over the course of 2018 through 2020. Very normal to have a crash, retrace, reaccumulation, explosion. So if we look at the structure of what was going on with a altcoin versus Bitcoin pairing prior to it exploding and going on a massive bull run, can we try to look at other altcoins and say, are there similar structures that are happening in the altcoin market right now? And yeah, I think we do. And especially it's the cleanest over here on Litecoin. And we can look at some other examples as well. But what we see with Litecoin over the course of history, right? We go way back to 2014 and look at the full blown structure of Litecoin. If you're not looking at it, like specifically looking for retracements and structures, it just looks like a bunch of slop. Like here, you just look at it and you're like, how do you make a whole lot of sense of what's going on with this chart? It just looks like occasionally there's these big pops that eventually end up happening in Litecoin. But when we have a structure to look back on and understand there's crash, retrace, reaccumulation back to the low, we can see that Litecoin over the course of the last 8 years has followed this structure with a big initial fall from the highs, retrace, capitulation, followed by a retracement. And the retracement level doesn't get us back to above all-time highs. It gets us into a retracement region, followed by a reaccumulation right back down to the lows, which is what we've seen. And while structurally things are different, we're on different timescales, we're on different liquidities here between the two. So when we're back in here in the retracements, we have to kind of like, figure out where are we, but we see these moments of where, there was a typical crashing structure, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, rolls back up, finishes its off, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, finishes off. And then once it breaks below this level, we see these standard structures come in of 1, 2, 3, where they're just not setting new highs, but they're attempting to get back through there once again. And then finally, on the last one, we come back right down to the lows. And we can see over here, even on Litecoin, on this monstrous time frame for the Litecoin versus Bitcoin chart, that's precisely what we've had happen. Crash, capitulation, retrace, breaks below that level, 3 attempts to try to get through it, and here we are on the third push down, getting right back down to our lows, and the lows that were set back there in early 2017. And so if there is any signal in here for Litecoin's Bitcoin pairing, not only has it come down and hit the low like we had with Verge down in here, which then bounced up and came back to the low before going sideways and breaking out, that's what's happened already here with Litecoin. Hits the lows, back up to the lows, sideways, and it's starting to move up. Again, I don't spend a ton of time staring at these charts of these altcoins versus these Bitcoins, but I do spend time looking over here at these dominance charts and recognizing where the dominance is at right now right on the brink of this breakdown for Ethereum and Bitcoin combined, which is what we saw happen in 2017 and 2018 before there was this big push in the remainder of the market. And seeing that, not only is the structure similar, but it's like right on the brink. It's literally at the low. It's absolutely right where it would be before a breakdown would occur, which would indicate a dominance reclaim occurring over there in the altcoin market, and in particular ones that have yet to have a big reclaim. And so this dominance sits right on the darn brink of it. I mean, you can't get any closer than that right there at that point. And we look over here at the long-term structure of something like Litecoin in comparison to what a crash, retrace, reaccumulation looks like, and the three waves that occur on the bottom as it goes back in to retouch that low, and that from a structural standpoint on all of this, it is literally right there if it's going to play out the same. If we look at something like Cardano, we can look back to before it ended up taking off and seeing that, hey, look, it took out that low. It did this similar style thing, right? You have one attempt to come back up, another attempt to come back up, and then one more fall. This one doesn't quite set a new low down in here before Cardano eventually breaks off and goes. But same concept, right? We take out that low from March of 2018, a couple attempts to try to get through without setting new highs in here, and then finally it's able to take off. Ethereum structure is actually a little bit different, showing it's like in a different phase than what Litecoin's actually in. Because if we look at Ethereum, it's actually in that same type of crash, retrace, reaccumulation phase where it has the big run up, the big massive fall, the bouncing, and then the capitulation. So what phase would that indicate that Ethereum is actually in? And it indicates that Ethereum's actually just in the retracement phase back in here, and that Ethereum in the future is heading right back down to these lows all over again. But what's so interesting about XRP is it has the same thing going on in here, where we have 1, 2, and 3, just like we saw over there on Cardano. And that if it's going to pull off something similar to what we saw with Cardano, well, then your area is right up in here, unless due to the historical time period of XRP being around for so long, it's set up something more like Litecoin is. But regardless, it has the same thing going on in here as Cardano did. And if XRP were to have a similar rise to what we saw over there with Cardano, where you get back to just a retracement level, it's a 900% rise versus Bitcoin. So if the price of Bitcoin is somewhere in this $55,000 to $58,000 price range, and XRP's up in here around 0.00017 Bitcoin, well, $58,000 times 0.00017 equals $9.86. Of course, the 702 sits higher than that. The 702 sits at 0.000185. In that circumstance, puts you at $10.73. What if it ends up going up here? As you can see, even on a big retracement in here for XRP, getting back up in here, just like Cardano, where does it get you to? That $10 price area, right? So the question is there any signal that's going on in here? And well, if we're just going to go based on structures of how these things have played out previously, then a lot of these coins are set up like the ones that were set up that have taken off before. And that even XRP in here is set up like the moment before Cardano took off. And that Litecoin is set up like Verge. And Litecoin's setup is not like a 7-month setup like Verge's was. Litecoin's setup is an 8-year setup of a crash, retrace, reaccumulation. 8 years. And so, am I feeling FOMO? You better believe I'm feeling FOMO for the altcoin market. Do I know if it's going to happen today, tomorrow, a month from now, if it's going to take a whole year to play out? I don't have that answer. But I know that a lot of these charts are setting up in ways that we've seen before, and they're at their lows on their Bitcoin pairings. And that this thing is on the absolute brink at this moment for the Bitcoin and Ethereum dominance. And that while a lot of people focus on the few new coins that have been hyped and have gone on big runs during this bull run, the reality is the vast majority of the market has not. 90% of the market has not gone on this big run. And these things historically have represented the whole market going. At least the ones that were not the leaders of the market. There's lots of coins that have been leaders and have already gone on big, massive runs. So we're talking really about the stuff that hasn't gone, which is, 90% of the market. But either way, as that dominance is sitting right down there on the very bottom, maybe that's giving us some type of sign too. Maybe Bitcoin is going to break and it's going to happen pretty quick, and that dominance will temporarily hold for a moment until Bitcoin does get to its low. Either way, it's hard to know right now. So I'm showing you everything. But overall, I think we're getting a really big signal over there in the altcoin market that that's the place to be. At least that's the place where I am. Over 90% of my assets are in the altcoin market. 90% of the total value of my portfolio is altcoins. And if Bitcoin's going to flush us down into those $30,000, hey, you know what? Let's just go ahead and get it over with. And that way we can get those altcoins started. Because right now, we've just been stuck. And something's got to give at some point. I always say, this too shall pass. And, I didn't come up with that, obviously, but it does. These moments always do pass. We've just got to get through them and patiently wait them out. But in general, when I look at the broader perspective of the market, I'm incredibly excited for what's to come for the altcoin market. But I also do have the experience in this market from long enough to know when sentiment swings one way and the other way. And, be prepared that if Bitcoin does go down into those 30,000s, that people are going to become extremely pessimistic. And then the next time when Bitcoin stalls and it doesn't have some type of big V bottom recovery out of there, but goes into a slow type of retracement, that won't fade. That sentiment will remain that Bitcoin is going to continue breaking down. And why is that? And that's because the general consensus of retail investors is always wrong. That was the same thing that happened to them at the top. We will most likely, and we'll see it when it comes, see the same type of sentiment happen if Bitcoin gets down into those 30,000s and doesn't just V bottom recover out of there, but does exactly like what it's been doing right now. Just kind of pauses and stays there for a minute and slowly grinds, because the retracements we keep showing are that they are very slow, they are very grueling, and they're not V bottom recoveries. So, we'll have to go into this with an expectation that sentiment in the market will remain low, but that's just merely because the market doesn't see it. But just like in the 60Ks, when I was sitting there saying Bitcoin's going to reverse and the masses were yelling at me that I'm wrong, they will do the exact same thing at the bottom. No, man, you're always saying it's going to go up. You're just a mood boy. They're very predictable. Very, very, very predictable. And so I'll be here. I'll be the rallier. I'll be the words of encouragement and the pick me up. And it's because I genuinely believe it. But until then, we're just going to have to wait and see. But overall, my optimism for the altcoin market is certainly huge. And I think there's even this chance that we see something that we can't even wrap our heads around. It might be that amazing. So if that Litecoin chart is telling the truth right there, and if that's going to give signal to what's going to happen in other areas of the market, we might see something remarkable. So, all right, that's it. I'm going to wrap this up. This video is ridiculously long. I apologize that it is so long. I hope that you liked it. I'll catch you guys again on Wednesday, unless if there's some type of big dramatic move that comes in the market tomorrow. Otherwise, if you're looking for something to do, you could check out my website over here, bcbacker.com. It's a course that I put together where I deep dive into the previous Bitcoin bull runs, the previous altcoin market cycles, tying them all together to show you how the cryptocurrency market has worked in the past. Structured very similar to my YouTube channel, me talking over a bunch of charts. It's not a PowerPoint presentation, but similar to my YouTube channel. I talk about my personal exit plans in here, teach you how to set up your own charts and your own indicators within TradingView and CoinTrader Pro. Recently had some market updates in here and some exit plan updates. The most recent market update is down there on December 31st. And you could check out all of this educational content over here on bcbacker.com. You can follow me over here on Twitter at bcbacker. And I want to thank you so much for watching my channel. If you could, please like this video and give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you could be notified of when I create new content and when I go live. As always, this is not investment advice and I am not a financial advisor. But if you ever need a pick-me-up or a little bit of reassurance, just remember that the blockchain backers got your back. Have a good one.